Can we go ahead? Good morning, good morning, good morning. Go ahead and come in, take a seat. Let's get going with today's guest. Always excited to have a guest come to us, interact, meet them, have them meet us. But in the case of Carol happens to be an alum, so Carol's coming back. Carol Rashawnna Williams is our guest today, and we're going to have her introduction given by Emrys, who's in the program Life with Things. So.
Hi, my name's Emrys Takahashi. I am a student in Life with Things with Julia and Eric. We're learning about metalworking and the connection between people and objects. Today, I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Carol Rashawnna Williams. She's a graduate of Evergreen, and she currently lives in Seattle, where she works as an artist and a mentor to emerging artists from various backgrounds through her position as the co-executive director of the Community Arts Create Incubator. Her recent solo exhibitions include a major installation at the Hedring Gallery at Seattle University, and she was recently featured in a Seattle Times article on how art can help fight climate change. Thank you. Carol is a mother to 2 children, a musician of 21 years who can play the violin and the viola, and a City of Seattle Parks and Recreation urban forest educator. She loves to teach about conifers, indigenous and invasive species, and you can find her walking all over Seattle. From Carol's bio, I've learned that Carol deeply believes in the power of art to build community, bridge community relationships, and create authentic space for healing. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Carol's work, and I'm particularly interested in the way that her art intersects issues of race and climate justice through the concept of resource extraction. So, without further ado, let's welcome Carol Williams.
Good morning, or afternoon. It's actually afternoon, isn't it? I am so excited to be here, and I hope I do a great job, so please just clap for me and help me feel good. Yay! I never imagined that I would actually be coming to Evergreen and doing a lecture at any point in my life, and so this is exciting for me. And I really appreciate all of you guys for coming out and hearing what I have to say. I'm going to go through the slides and then have questions at the end. And I just I wrote everything out, so I'm just going to read from that, and then go through the pictures and the slides and all that stuff. So my intro starts with, Evergreen is more than a school to me. It is, let's see, there it is, okay. Evergreen is more than a school to me. It's the story of the land in a place that I really connected to when I was here. At Evergreen, I learned to think critically, to see objectively, and to understand alternatives. I learned to love old growth trees, even though I had no idea that's what they were at the time. I learned to read 300-page books and to write better than I learned to read. I learned that love could be found, that life had meaning, and that the nature and environment were a part of you. I learned that food, depending on where it is grown and how it's made, makes a difference in your body. I learned that just because someone is different from you, that you can have a civil discussion without belittling each other. Let's go to the next slide. This is my piece called The Healing Forest 1, and it's an installation piece. Since my time at Evergreen, I have come to understand that a lot, if not all of these things, have led me to where I am currently today. I understand deeply now that art is going through a rebirth, and that art and equity must be at the center of everything in our culture. The term art and the paradigm around it has begun to shift. I have started to think critically and deeply inquire about the interconnectedness of the current state of our world. This has led me to see seeds of a future where art is imperative and should be harnessed to employ equity into every system, every field, and every governing body we have. The framework for this lecture, in this time that I have with you today, I would like to talk about my childhood, where I came from, and what led me to become an artist. I would like to examine the state of the current art world / field, its assumptions and systems. I would like to offer up an alternative perspective to the current models of art, and in so doing, hopefully shift the dialogue from one of scarcity to one of abundance. I would like to try to connect the dots for you from a sustainable viewpoint. Bio, who am I? And why does that matter? Why is that so important? First, I'd like to walk you through my childhood. I grew up on an army base in the middle of a foreign country called Germany. All my needs were met. It was a very racially diverse community with many languages. Everyone knew everybody, and nobody locked their doors. There were always community meals, parties, and celebrations. It was like a tightly woven, intentionally created community built on the patriotic belief and hope in America. Boy, like doing both of these at the same time is kind of crazy. My first written language was German, and my home language was English. In German schools, we have visited amazing castles, caves filled with jewels, and museums that house some of the world's best paintings. This was my first exposure to art. I was an only child who was very sickly up until the age of 10. I was considered a miracle baby because I was born 2 months premature and weighed only 2.5 pounds. I was not expected to live, but I believe that because I was born on an army base with the latest technology at the time, that's probably why I survived. By the time I had been born, my mother had already had 2 miscarriages and 1 stillbirth. I was in an incubator for the first 3 months of my life. Because I was always sick, I spent a lot of time alone, and when I was 4 years old, my mother decided that I would become a music prodigy. I began private violin classes from home, and by the time I reached high school, I had become first chair violin and a viola player. And an extended family member gave me a set of crayons when I was 5 years old, and after tasting them, I was hooked on drawing. I drew everything, colored everything, and got in trouble many times for drawing on the walls in our house. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. There we go. When my parents split up, me and my mother moved to Tacoma, Washington. This was the first time I had been in a completely Black community. I was 12 years old. All of my teachers were white. Our neighborhood was gang infested, and my mother was now a single woman on welfare with Section 8 housing. This was when I learned about race and classism. My entire world had been shifted and turned upside down. At the age of 15, and because of our new financial status, my school counselor told my mother that she should enroll me into a college prep program for high achievers called Upward Bound, that I could get scholarships and exposure to college life prep skills. The previous summers, I had taken summer school classes to catch up, and they just all happened to be art classes, primarily sculpture, like mask making and paper mache stuff. This was my second exposure to arts. I would receive my third exposure to the arts after enrolling in Upward Bound. Throughout the school year, we would visit, let's move on to the next one. Throughout the school year, we would visit museums, schools, and events where art exposure was paramount. Looking back, I now realize that these were opportunities I had for free that others did not. I've also come to realize that even my slim exposure at that time did not include artists of color, either in the history books or in real life as teachers or role models. I had never seen a real artist before, or even knew of any artists of color until I came to Evergreen. I didn't even know that art was a field that I could go into. I was 21 by the time I realized that I wanted to be an artist, but at that time I did not even know what that actually meant. My mother tried to discourage me and said artists starve to death and that I was too talented to waste my time becoming an artist. She wanted me to go to college to get a good job where I had benefits and could retire. She wanted the best for me, of course, and I believed that I could have those, and she believed that I could have those opportunities here in America. Let's move to the next one. My first go-round to college, I dropped out of Evergreen after the first year, and I found myself in Seattle. I was dealing with a lot of internalized oppression from the community I had grown up in and was struggling to understand my own mother and her philosophy of life. Academically, I was ready for college, but socially, going from an all-African American community to an all-Caucasian European community at Evergreen, I was not ready for that. My first year at Evergreen was all about culture shock. A year later, I dropped out, moved to Seattle, and then a year after that, I became pregnant and homeless. I got on welfare and enrolled in Seattle Central Community College to take art classes so that I could apply for their graphic illustration program. After I got into the graphic illustration program, on my very first day of class, the financial aid officer pulled me out of class and said I could not be there. My loans from Evergreen had gone into default. I was lucky because a friend in Tacoma had just placed a job announcement and was looking for teachers' aid in their Head Start program. I got the job and spent the next 4 years in Tacoma paying off my previous student loans that I had gotten from Evergreen, and then reapplied to Evergreen and got back in. All I wanted to do was get an education and make my mom proud. I knew that the education I had been exposed to at Evergreen was one of the best in the country, so I decided to come back here and really stick it out and make it worthwhile. My second go-round at Evergreen, all my classes were in art, and I graduated with a degree in advanced studio arts. I didn't know what I was going to do with such a degree, but I knew that I wanted to give back to my community. So I applied to Vista AmeriCorps my senior year, a program quite like the Peace Corps, except locally in traditionally underfunded communities in the United States. After receiving my assignment as a job and health coach at the Head Start in the White Center neighborhood of Seattle, Washington, I got my start in the professional job world. I went on to manage, supervise, coach, and mentor youth who were homeless, young adults and men who had been incarcerated, and single moms in employment programs such as the Working Zone, Upward Bound, Youth Build, Youth Leaders of Promise, Mainstay, and the YWCA. This 20-year experience helped me to understand equity in relation to class, race, and gender. I became witness to systems already in play before I was born that were created to manage people, such as the school-to-prison pipeline, redlining, and the tracking of students into college out of the public school system. I began to feel this tension between needing to make money and just wanting to make a positive change in the world. By this time, as a single mom myself, I had experienced my own roadblocks in our American educational system, the banking system, the healthcare system, the justice system, and the social service system. A few examples of this are, before my second go-round at Evergreen, I was told in order to receive food stamps, state financial assistance, I would have to go to work, not school. A second example is I was pulled out of the graphic illustration program at Seattle Central because I could not pay for it. Trying to work full-time and go to school with a young child was one of the hardest things I have ever done. A third example is that I fought every step of the way to make sure my son got an education, though he had already been tracked into prison, starting in kindergarten, which at the time I did not know or recognize until it was too late. The fourth example is that my mother was placed and died in a nursing home, not my will. I fought with the state to have her at home with me and to get a stay-in caregiver. But the state would not allow it, saying that because of my mother's size, she could not be cared for at home. So, in 2003, after I received my master's in organizational development from Antioch Seattle University, I vowed to use this degree to change the world and use my understanding of systems theory to really look at how American systems actually destabilize our country. It took me 10 years to fully realize this degree because organizations and companies had a hard time seeing the possibility of an African American woman leading them, let alone knowing and teaching them about anything to do with systems theory and paradigm change. In 2006, I became disillusioned with the nonprofit sector and started my for-profit business, CoLab for Art. I wanted to transfer my skill set from helping low-income families to mentoring and coaching traditionally underserved LGBTQ, BIPOC, and single mom artists. My CoLab for Art mission: art access, art exposure, art opportunities for traditionally underserved populations. The change in my mind was one from scarcity to one of abundance. At this time, I understood the power of art personally, for it had saved my life. It gave me hope. Through the hurdles, the obstacles, and all the closed doors, no one could take away my ability to create, to believe, or to paint a different story than the one I had been experiencing. At this time, I finally understood the power of art personally, for it had saved my life. I had not yet fully understand the power of art as a tool in the collective journey to define our culture, create economic opportunities, and to anchor communities in common ground. At the time, I could see glimpses of it, but could not fully articulate what I was visioning. As I made this shift from working with individuals trapped in equitable systems to working with ideas of power, owning my own business, creating leadership opportunities, organizing communities around race and climate justice, I began to attract like-minded individuals that would help my art practice grow and my vision of a sustainable world become one of potential. In 2016, I was gentrified out of my 5-bedroom house and had been on the Live Workspace artist waiting list for 6 years at the Tashiro Kaplan Artist Loft. It was a miracle that my name came up on the wait list, just as I was struggling to decide if I should move from Seattle. Because I could no longer afford to live there, it's funny because I had actually forgotten that I was on the wait list, and so it was an extreme surprise to me when I got the phone call. I decided that I would move into the artist loft, Tashiro Artist Loft, in June of 2016. It was a planned intentional artist community in a live workspace building with galleries on the first level. I had never been exposed to real full-time working professional artists before. Over the past 3 years, I have built relationships with fabric designers, architects, game designers, graphic illustrators, musicians, actors, and artists working in upcycled mediums. Living in this community taught me firsthand how to run an art business, how to partner with like-minded individuals, and provided numerous exhibition and promotion opportunities. I began to realize that this was the first time in my life I felt like a real artist. I began to become intricately connected to the art world in a very different way. I began to see that I could utilize my organizational systems renewal degree as a leverage point to change the art world. At that time, I had recently co-founded the Race and Climate Justice Group. We were where we began to conduct bi-monthly workshops to community about the connection between race and climate change. This gave me the opportunity to dive deep into the environmental movement, and I began to see myself not only as an artist, but also as an environmental leader. After about 6 months, more and more leaders of the top environmental agencies in Seattle started attending our workshops. More and more of my art practice and work started to be about climate change. Slowly, I started to make the connection between what was happening in the art world to what was happening in the environmental world. Resource extraction and the centuries-long alienation of people of color in both of these fields. I started to recognize that neither the practice of art nor the enjoyment of nature in their current forms are a natural result of evolution. I started to wonder, can the art world and the environmental world be decolonized? The state of the current art world. Now I'd like to shift for a moment from my story to discuss the relationship between my lived experience and the state of the current art and environmental world. Let's look at the current model of the art world. There are various options for visual artists: gallery representation, art fair sales, grants and scholarships, exhibition opportunities, night markets, and public art. The current art field has been propped up by the assumption that you are either a starving artist or a successful artist making a living primarily from the sales of your artwork or teaching opportunities, which, by the way, is only about 10% of all artists. This model doesn't leave room for most of the professional artists that I know who are not starving. Most of these professional artists have either a full-time job that pays the bills and do art part-time or on the side to supplement their income. Other professional artists I know live primarily from competing commissions, taking 3 to 4 commissions a year to live on, and then hustle on side gigs to fill in the gaps. Teaching artists are better off because they have a consistent income and benefits, and depending on where you work, they can retire and get all kinds of really great vacation opportunities. Most of those positions are coveted, and you have to have a master's in fine art to get them. With these positions declining due to schools slashing their art programs nationwide, there's very high competition for teaching art positions. I wanted to be the artist that could support myself from the practice of my art career, not just my artwork. Most people know very early on that they are an artist, yet get swayed and pulled from that direction because of the myth that has been propagated for centuries, leading to what society believes about artists, that you can't make a living as an artist, that artists are not good business people, and that artists are flaky. For artists without an art community or a significant other that can help to supplement their practice, the road to becoming a professional artist is wrought with hurdles, missed opportunities, and huge mistakes that can sometimes cost them financially in the long run. What most professional artists will tell you is that it is hard to be an artist part-time unless you have a partner. And launching into the art world as a full-time artist is very difficult for single parents, women, and people of color. To me, this is an equity issue, not a time issue. Universities are currently questioning if art degrees are even needed, and many schools across the nation have dismantled their MFA programs. And most well-paid art jobs expect you to have an MFA, which I just said earlier, as it is the PhD of the art world. Without it, most art positions that come with benefits are difficult to get because there's so much competition. K12 public schools have taken art subjects out of their curriculums, leaving disadvantaged youth without access to art exposure. Nonprofits have tried to pick up the slack by creating after-school art programs, but if you are a child of a single parent, chances are that you might not have access to these after-school programs if they are not directly in your neighborhood or co-located at your child's school. Funding for the arts continues to decline, both with city and federal grants. So what you now see are nonprofit agencies fighting for the same piece of the pie, which continues to grow ever smaller each year. With more emphasis on 21st century skill sets like math and science curriculums, art has been relegated to the stepchild role of the art education field. Unwittingly, art, to me personally, is a 21st century skill set where you learn to critique, analyze, and actually have critical feedback from others. It takes a skill to learn these three things, and in the practice of art, that can be developed. Art has become a commodity like cars and houses, disconnected from the original purpose of art. Before Western colonization, art in what we consider to be developing countries was at the center of everything and was culture. Art was not for the select few. It was free, and everyone in a tribe or village got exposure to the process of art in all forms, from community dancing, singing, and the making of utilitarian materials like baskets, clothing, and jewelry, items today we currently deem as craft art. Relegating art to gallery walls set the stage for art as privilege, art as a commodity, art as exclusive, and left a large number of folks out of the equation. The state of the Seattle art world. Now I'd like to shift and talk a little bit about the state of the Seattle art scene. The city of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture redesigned the King Street Station, which just opened this past year. It was designed to be a hub for artists of color by providing performance, work, and gallery exhibition space for artists of color. The belief was that if they could create a cultural anchor space in the heart of Seattle that would bring back and give artists of color, that it would bring back and give artists of color who moved out of Seattle a place to connect and come back to. A place in Seattle where artists could get access to opportunities. Due to the rising cost of housing and job wages, Seattle is hemorrhaging artists, not only artists of color. They are fleeing at an unprecedented rate. The Seattle Office of Arts and Culture noticed such a decline in artists living in Seattle that 3 years ago, they launched the Building Art Space Equitably Project. It's a really hard acronym to say. It's so long. And it's called BASE for short. At that time, I was brought on as a consultant to help build the curriculum and launch the BASE project. In the BASE project, we focused on equity. Over the span of 1 year, we trained 38 people of color, all of which were artists, real estate agents, land developers, and property investors. Why would we do this? Due to the history of Seattle, redlining left a huge number of folks out of the city planning process. Folks could only live within the boundaries set for them. And due to this, the Central District, Chinatown, and Pioneer Square became thriving centers for BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. Rainier Valley became the most diverse zip code in the country, with corporations moving into Seattle and buying up the land. The cost of the living there began to skyrocket, displacing large groups of people. To try to offset this, the guiding assumption was, what if we could create cultural spaces that last forever? that belonged to community. The only way to do this was to flip the current property development model on its head and start from a place of equity, providing communities traditionally left out of neighborhood planning, land development, land acquisition, and access to affordable space, a place to learn, to grow, and to teach others all about equitable land development. We can no longer ignore the ability of art to transform lives. We can no longer ignore the role of Western artistic practices, artistic belief systems, and equitable access to art platforms in the transition to a more just planet. These two concepts are in direct opposition to one another. Now I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my current practice as an artist and how the state of the art world and the state of the Seattle art scene have shifted my understanding and where I feel like my most impactful work can be. Recently, I was accepted into the Environmental Leaders Program, in which leaders in the fight for climate justice are supported and provided leadership tools and a vast network of national fellows. As of 2010, most of my artwork has highlighted old-growth forest, endangered animals, and entire species extinction. My work bridges the gaps between mass migration due to climate change and explores privilege, not only of white America, but of America as a framework in global domination. In 2018, I was accepted to an international residency in Spain, in which I explored a large-scale mobile installation built and designed by communities from 3 separate villages. I interviewed and collected stories via their own artwork. What I learned from this experience is that everyone has a story, that everyone has been impacted by something, that we are all human, and that the story can change uncountable number and that a story can change an uncountable number of lives. It is my belief that a culture of capitalist whiteness has brought us to a cliff. On the brink of species extinction. Yet the irony is that in order for humanity to not commit utter suicide and throw itself off the proverbial cliff, the only thing that will save us is a collective visioning, steadfast cooperation, heartfelt empathy, and the patience to try and understand one another, especially when we cannot get along. Most of my artwork and figures are painted as genderless, colorless, and at times seen like foreign animals. I have been blessed to be able to paint, to share my work with the world. I have never felt pressured to sell art because I have always been about the storytelling of art, utilizing art as a tool in storytelling and connecting people from diverse backgrounds. I've always asked the question, how can you gather the largest group and share your work or have others participate in it? How can it become a collective experience, a communal experience? The older I get, the more I see that art is a tool for education, for engagement, and collaboration. The more I view art as a way to bring diverse groups together, to bridge difference, or build collective identity around a common topic, the more I see the power of the collective. I would like to talk a little bit now about a possible preferred future. One alternative. How do we move the dialogue of art from one traditionally built out of a scarcity model, where there is not enough to go around, to one of abundance, where everyone's needs are met? I do not have all the answers, but I would like now to try to connect the dots for you from a sustainable viewpoint. I would like to propose an alternative, a complete paradigm shift, a vision where art is again at the center of human connection, and where artisans can make a viable income from their efforts, where we live, where we work, where we know our neighbors and those in our communities, where made and bought locally really means something. These are not new models. They have been around for centuries. They just have not been supported or promoted by the establishment, especially in communities of color. In a capitalistic system, there must be a product, a buyer, and a resource that has been extracted in order to make those products. Traditionally, African Americans have been that extracted resource. And today that model has engulfed other communities of color and gone global. What if democracy equaled collective ownership models? What if co-ownership models were supported culturally by every American? What if co-op housing models, shared living spaces, tiny houses, and I'm not talking about the ones you see that they're building to house people who happen to be homeless. I'm talking about substantial tiny houses that are actually a home. What if that was a model for equity, to build equity in our communities? What if co-op business models were instead of corporations controlling our interests, we the people controlled our own collective businesses, providing our own desired wages, our own moral compasses for our own collective businesses? What if shared ownership in the land, building intentional collective communities that thrive over centuries because they are in relationship to one another long term, with the goal of supporting the whole, not a piece of the whole, 1%? What if intergenerational activities were the norm and the elderly lived and died in their communities, not alone in a nursing home? What if one vote really meant one vote? What if all Americans had their basic needs met, like food to eat, a free education, and a place to sleep? What if there were places businesses knew where to go to donate their overstock goods or their excess products and materials? A place where upcycling and changing current products into new things could be recycled, and that was actually the norm. What if, before any chemical was approved, it had to be vetted to be sustainable, to support a sustainable culture? What if everyone on the planet knew one thing that they could do today, right now, and could commit to change and help and shift the global climate warming situation? What if nothing went into landfills and everything was recycled or upcycled, and thrift stores actually received tax deductions for reselling used merchandise? What if equity was the standard, not the aversion, and everyone had what they needed? I would like to propose that these are all system challenges, that the only reason these things have not been done is because we, the people of America, have been distracted. And this distraction is good for those in power. distracted by horrible governing leaders on both sides of the aisle, distracted by misinformation and working overtime, distracted by shiny objects and a need to be on top, distracted by a culture that needs us to be fighting and arguing amongst ourselves over race, over income, over who is a citizen and who is not. What we must come to understand is that these are all design, intentional distractions, and that the symptoms of depression, of self-hate, of isolation we currently see this country in are all a fallout from these distractions. This is a scarcity model. Alone and individually, I do not believe we can heal ourselves. But collectively, in communion with someone you disagree with, or someone who is very different from you, we just might have a chance at building a much better world than the one we have been given. My wrap-up starts with, how can the power of art as a tool bring us closer together as a country and in a collective journey to define our culture, create economic opportunities, and to anchor communities in common ground? Currently, I am on contract to help figure all of this out. I understand shared models as I have always worked better as a part of a team than alone. Although I excel very much at working alone, I don't quite prefer it. As the co-director of an arts agency, it takes patience, clear communication, a value in knowing it's okay to make mistakes, and trust to be able to share a leadership position. As a co-director, we have had our challenges, but because we have the same goal in mind, we come and work everything out together. Not everyone can do this. Not everyone can share a job title because of ego, because of needing to be right, or because they want all the money. And honestly, as a democratic society, we have not been taught very well how to be democratic. So the idea of shared anything is a very difficult concept for Americans to understand as a whole. Art has the power to connect us to each other in positive ways if we pay attention. It can help us envision a new way of walking in the world, a walk that will require biospecies understanding and empathy. We must harness ideas of power to build new frameworks in which culture is art and art is culture, powerful enough to lead us into a collective understanding about our current reality so that we can change it for the betterment of all and for the common good. This is the model of abundance. We can no longer ignore that we are in a war to protect our water source, our land, and the quality of our air. We can no longer ignore that many who lay homeless in tents, in sleeping bags, while there are those amongst us who pocket millions, if not billions of dollars, is not okay. Art and the definition of art is going through a rebirth. We are questioning the way we use our materials, what type of materials we use, what is sustainable practice in art, and what is art. Bringing in craft arts into the fold. Equity must be at the center of this rebirth. If you are a part of the 99%, this means you. The term art and the paradigm around it has begun to shift. The interconnectedness of the current state of the world will depend on how we will harness art actions, activities, and new models related to art. A country cannot thrive if it has no vision, if it has no center, and if its people are divided. The seeds of a future where art is imperative, where it's at every board meeting, in every Senate debate, and being harnessed to employ equity into every system, into every governing body, we have. This could be a grassroots movement. Maker spaces, visual artists discussing unionizing, collective workspaces, the development of artists-owned land trusts, and web-based art businesses where artists are now refusing to hand over their commissions of 50, 60, 70%, are all seeds of this future starting to sprout. These potentials can give rise to job, business, and entrepreneurial training. They can empower disadvantaged communities. This is a model and a vision of equity and power. I would like to end by saying art is no longer just a commodity for the elite. Though some of the highest sales of art have been recorded in this decade alone. For our planet to survive, we need art to create opportunities not only to talk about difficult topics, but also to build bridges between the deeply divided relationships in this country. Artists are now being called culture workers, shifting what we think we know about the public spaces we inhabit. There are enough resources to go around. There is abundance in the world, though many natural resources and entire species are going extinct. If we center art in the collective community as action, the possibility of an endless sustainable viewpoint will arise and take root. We cannot be afraid of what's to come. As I urge you to seek out and build a world that supports all life forms. We must build the new paradigm at the same time as the old paradigm is dying. If you consider yourself an artist, the world desperately needs you right now. And anything is possible. Thank you. Thank you for asking that question, because I'm really excited to talk about the project that I'm actually currently working on. We have started the Hellman City Renaissance. I don't know if you know where Hellman City is. It's about 4 blocks south of Columbia City in Seattle. And if you drive through it, you probably won't even know that you drove through it. That's how small it is. But because it's one of those places that you would drive through really fast and not even know that you're there, it is actually the perfect opportunity in the making if we can harness the opportunity right now. One of my experiences that I had last year when I had a residency in Spain for 3 months, and interviewing 3 different villages, I got a perspective on what it means to live communally. Almost every village, out of all 3 of these villages that I actually interviewed, their families had been in those villages for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So everybody was related. So the one village that my friend lived in, his uncle was the mayor. His aunt was like his secretary. Like, so everybody, cousins, everybody would, when you went to the open stage that was like smack dab in the middle of the village where they had all of their cultural stuff, everybody was related, right? And it's because nobody moved out of that village. They stayed and created culture over generations. This idea got me to thinking a lot about what's happening in Seattle. And working on the base cohort with the city of Seattle, I started to learn a lot about community land trusts, public development agencies, and co-op or collective ownership models. So like PCC, the public market, Pike Place Market is a PDA. Washington has more PDAs in the entire country than any other state. And the intention behind that was to put a piece of land in the power and control of the people. So whatever happens to that land, people get to vote on, people get to like commit and help make it beautiful and provide all kinds of really cool things. So in this 4-block radius of Hellman City, we have currently just purchased one building, the Black and Tan Hall, which is it's owned by 42 people, so it is a collective ownership model. And it's a music venue. It was an old theater back in the 1920s and 30s. And we've already started, it's been re-gutted and all this other stuff. And so the hope is that it's also going to be a training site for individuals coming out of prison, for individuals that have no job skills, and are having a hard time finding job skills. That's an example of how one space, a cultural space, could potentially change the lives of people in the actual community. The other thing that we're doing with this 4-block radius is that in January, our actual building where we work at is a collective co-laboratory space that was co-founded by the agency I'm working with, or work for. Our landlord is going to put the building up for sale. And so either we buy the building or we move. And so we've been in conversation with CAST, which is an organization located in California. They specifically buy multiple properties for arts agencies to put in a land trust for the community. And so we're currently in conversation with them and other property developers and investors and funders. I've been having conversations all month with Seattle Foundation and Satterberg, and For Culture, about this concept of taking 4 blocks and literally creating an art community where we put housing for artists on the tops of all of the buildings and create maker spaces and opportunities for people who do not have a degree or people who have never gone to college can come to the wood shop, learn skills, create their own stuff, start their own business, and make their own money. And build businesses that are a collective model. So that's kind of, that's the long answer to your question. But for me, that is the future of art. It's about community, and it's located in communities where we're creating and upcycling our own stuff. There's so much stuff going into the landfills. Like this picture you see right now, somebody threw 2 huge bolts. I don't even know how much it was square feet it was, but this filled a 2,000 square foot room, this installation. All of this silk was just thrown in the garbage. I dumpster dive, sorry. But I'm always clean, don't get me. I do take showers, but I love to recycle and upcycle stuff. And so a lot of the stuff in a lot of my work, like the canvas, is upcycled. There's this company down south. It's like Renton. No, it's further south than that. It's like before. It's past Renton, but before Federal Way. Every month, they throw away 8 feet by 10 feet ungessoed canvas. And huge, like 80-pound canvas. Hundreds of these are going in the landfill every flippin' month. So our agency has vowed to take at least 20 or 30 of them every quarter. It's not enough, but what I've started doing is literally contacting artists that I know and asking, do you need canvas? Do you need canvas? Go get canvas, right? And use it for everything. But this is just like a microcosm. Like, this is just one company in millions of companies in this country that are doing this without asking or inquiring, where can we put this stuff, right? And I really deeply believe that artists have the ability to take anything and transform it into powerful things. And if we can harness that and become a connector in terms of what's coming down the pike and learn to like recycle, upcycle, make new things out of old things and refurbish things, that's an economy in itself. And there hasn't been enough attention paid to that in this country. And personally, I believe it's because they don't want people to have small businesses. Because when I started my business, it was very difficult to get any information and to get any help or any of that. But yeah, okay, that's my answer. I do. I am in, well, and I just keep going like further and further down this route. I just think that like this idea that California gets more votes than is needed just doesn't make sense to me. And I can't see my vote doing anything, right? Because my vote is not really my vote, if that makes sense. There was a period where I didn't want to vote because I was kind of rebelling against this country. And then I realized that, like, if I don't vote, it's even worse. And so politically, I feel like as an American, it's my right to vote. But I don't like the system in which we're voting. And I don't necessarily think the way that we're voting is the correct way to vote. And to empower people, people need to feel like their vote counts, you know? So that's where that comes from. Does that make sense? I think I've cried a lot. That helps heal. And I think that that's a good thing, especially for African Americans and African American women specifically. You know, I think that like community and people are at the heart of helping other people heal. And if you're able to tell your story and somebody's willing to hear and listen to your story, that in itself is an act of empathy, an act of healing, an act of caring, actually. And I have been really blessed to be around and have very forward, progressive, positive thinking people in my life that have helped me to see the connections in terms of what I think I'm experiencing versus what I'm actually experiencing versus what the world wants me to experience. And those are three very distinct ways of walking in the world. And unfortunately, communities that are struggling financially have a hard time like deciphering that because it's designed that way. It's designed for us not to see it. And for me, I just like, if I couldn't paint, I don't think I would be here. I really don't think I would be here. It has been, for me, a deeply profound experience to be able to tell my story visually because I'm a visual person. And I've had amazing mentors, gallery owners and administrators and people in the art world that believe in what I'm doing, that have saved my life, like my friend just this weekend, I was at an environmental leaders program retreat, and there were a bunch of microaggressions the second day that I was there, and they were specifically targeted at me. And I called my friend up because she lived in the same area where the retreat was, and she's a professional artist. She's been a professional artist in Seattle for 50 years. And I said, and she's a white lady. I said, dude, I need you to come get me, and we've been friends for a long time. And I sat in her house, and she said, what is going on, And I told her, and she took the time to hear me. And just the act of hearing me helped me to heal. Just the act of not having to make things right or correct it or helped me to heal. And she's also like, it's very challenging to find a lot of people that get microaggressions, especially if you're not a person of color. And I think I've done a really good job of surrounding myself with those types of people that really are invested deeply in equitable change in the world, and they show it through their actions. They're not just speaking the language, because that's also a whole nother, and it takes time to decipher that too, Oh, okay. Cool. So actually my mother did want me to be an artist. She just didn't want me to be a visual artist. She wanted me to be a musician, and I was a really good musician. I was on my way to do that whole thing. But there was a point where I realized that wasn't my dream, it was my mother's dream. And there was a point where I realized that I just loved to draw, and I didn't know that you could make a career out of it. And I hadn't ever known any real artists. So I'd never had a role model. And then I went to Seattle Central and I came to Evergreen, and that was like my first exposure to the concept or the idea of actually being an artist. And at that time, I just thought an artist meant, okay, you paint and you sell your stuff in a gallery, because that's the model that is promoted in this country. I think that I was told very early on by a guy who owned a gallery. He said, no matter what you do, if you want to be an artist, a painter, produce, produce, produce. Even if you are not showing, even if nobody ever sees that work, even if, you lose a whole body of work and you're devastated and you don't want to produce after that, because that's happened to me where I've lost an entire portfolio and I almost had a nervous breakdown. It was like losing my child, And I took that information very critically, and it's always been in the back of my head, this idea that I just need to produce, and not produce for other people, but produce for myself. And in producing for myself, I touch and connect with other people. And it's a practice. It's not something that, you wake up every day and it's like, okay, I'm going to go sit in the studio, It's like you have to get up and you have to be like, okay, I'm going to paint today. I'm going to get this done. But I've also realized that, and this is another really great little key or note for everybody, is that the same person who told me that also told me that some artists have a season. Because I used to get really depressed, and I used to be like, oh my God, why am I not painting? What's wrong with me? Is there something wrong? I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, And he told me, he said, Carol, every artist has a season. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, for the next year, journal, when do you paint? What do you paint? How do you paint it? Is it in the morning? Is it at night? Is it in summertime? Is it in winter? What are you creating and why and how and when? And so for a year I did that. And what ended up at the end of the year, I realized, is that I'm a seasonal painter. I paint in the winter and I paint early spring. I kick some stuff out really heavily in the summer, but that's if I'm not like really busy. But my summer and my fall tend to be like stuff like this, extremely active in terms of doing engagement art and working with large groups around producing art. And so after I figured out what kind of artist I was, when I was like able to do my craft, that made it a lot easier on me. And I didn't feel like I was abandoning myself or not being an artist. So those things are like, I think that also helped, because if you're not producing, it's easy to slide out and say, oh, well, I'm not really an artist and I don't know what I'm really doing. And, so being empathetic with yourself and being kind to yourself around your craft, but just keep doing it. That to me is a difficult, hard thing to do. But over time, here I am. I have like a body of work that's like 25 years old. So maybe older than that. I don't know. But it's because I just kept doing it. I just keep doing it. Currently or before?
Like before and currently.
Okay. So as I was growing up, I was really interested in Amadeus and Mozart and all the classical musicians, just because I was playing the violin, When I came to Evergreen the first time, or no, it was the second time. When I came to Evergreen the second time, the internet had just started and it wasn't quite yet a thing. And so I had to do research in the library around artists. And my teacher happened to be Chinese, which was awesome. And it was the first person I'd ever met who was a person of color who was an artist. And he basically told me to research artists of color. And I tried and I tried and I tried and I couldn't find anybody. There was no books in our library, the library at Evergreen. There were no books on artists of color. I went to half-price books. I went to Barnes and Nobles. There were no resources. There was no information. And I was deeply interested in not the Western viewpoint of art. I was really interested in the viewpoint of art from a person of color's perspective. It wasn't until I actually moved to Seattle that I found out about Jacob Lawrence, which is sad because when I finally moved to Seattle, he had passed away, but when I was at Evergreen, he was still alive. So I could have met him if people would have known about him, right? Anyway, so I moved to Seattle and I learned about him, and I also learned about Dr. James W. Washington, who's a sculptor. So those two became kind of like my role models in terms of artists of color. But there were also artists of color that are not visual artists that were very profound for me. So like Tupac, I love me some Tupac, right? And I love Salt and Pepper, and I love, Mary J. Blige, and like all of these singers and the African American heroes of music from the genre that I come, the generation that I come from, were powerful. They set seeds in me that actually answers your question a little bit. They helped me to be strong, Public Enemy #1, KRS-One, all those cats. They like helped me to see that this illusion or this experience that I'm walking through was designed for me to feel bad. And once I realized that, and once I understood that, I found a new way to walk in the world in terms of, I've always been a really positive person, but I'm telling you, moving to this country at 12 years old was a fucking mind fuck. It was a mind fuck. Most of the countries in the world, except for now, are really about classism, and America is about classism, but we use race to hide that, right? And so I got like a huge crash course in race when I moved to this country. And so those African American singers, rappers, really helped me to see that it's not that I'm just in this water, and the reason I can't see that I'm in this water is because I'm a fish in this water, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. So about 4 years ago, I got a membership to the YMCA, and I started going to the hot tub every single morning. And what I realized after doing this now for about 4 years, 3.5 years, our body holds tension without us even knowing. Our minds hold negativity without us even knowing. And the world that is constructed for us right now is one of negativity. And if you are not doing some form of self-care or practice of self-love every single day, it's really hard to not be a part of that system. It's almost impossible. It really is just almost impossible, And so for me, it was about self-care. I had already, I think I mentioned earlier that, I think it was 2004, I became disillusioned with nonprofit work, and that was why. It was, I had a major burnout, and I was working too much, trying to do art full-time, trying to do work full-time, trying to raise my kids full-time. It was just too much. And what I realized is that if I don't take care of myself, nobody else is. And if I don't take care of myself, my kids aren't going to have somebody. My community's not going to have somebody. And so I stopped, and that's when in 2006, I was just like, I'm going to start my own business. And then in 2012, I decided I'm never working 40 hours a week for anybody. I'm not giving nobody, no corporation, no business, my time. And so I've been since 2000, and did I say 12? Yeah. Since 2012, I only work 20 hours a week. And that's intentional. I've designed my life that way. I've designed my life in a way as such that I get up in the morning, I go straight to the hot tub. I try to, and my goal is at least 4 times a week, because it's closed on Sundays, unfortunately. But I use that as a meditation time. I'm there for an hour and a half, and that's my filtering out of all this crap that is constantly coming at us. I don't watch TV. I don't have cable. I refuse to watch news that is propaganda. There are multiple things that I put in place in my life to be like, you can't make me be that person that you want me to be or the person you want to treat me as. I feel like I'm better than that, and I deserve better than that. And we all, as Americans, deserve better than that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Wow, those are really great questions. And thank you for bringing them up because I think they're extremely important. So the first one was about curriculum and why are there no people of color in the curriculum? Because we've been written out of the story, intentionally written out of the story. The second question about hiring teachers and funding and making sure that Evergreen has teachers of color and representation. And your third question, all relate not only to I'm going to try and unpack this in various ways. They all relate to this, what I've started calling about 2 years ago, school to art pipeline. The reason I call it that is because there's a pipeline, right? Just like the school to prison pipeline, there's an art pipeline and there's also an environmental pipeline. But the one I know most about is the art pipeline. It's designed for people of color not to be in that system. It's designed that way. So what I mean by that is an equitable model would make sure that there are African Americans, people of color entering institutions, right? But we can't enter those institutions if we don't understand that art is for us. If we don't understand that we have the power to create art, right? So an example of that is my mother discouraged me because she didn't see money in it. She couldn't see the possibility and she didn't know it. She didn't know the map, right? So the only artists that she'd probably ever seen were starving. And so my own community discouraged me, right? Then I went to school, and I'm talking like middle school and high school, and I didn't take any visual arts classes, but there weren't any, in my whole school, there's probably 2 people of color, 2 teachers of color. So there weren't even artists of color in my school. My orchestra teacher was white lady, you know. So my experience with art up until I came to Evergreen, and my teacher, who was a visual arts teacher, happened to be Chinese, was the first time in my entire life that I'd actually seen an artist of color, and it wasn't even a black person, right? Then what happens is that if you do go into the art field, you have to spend a certain amount of time paying off your student loans from that bachelor's degree. So most artists of color get discouraged and don't get a master's in fine art. A master's in fine art is equivalent to the PhD in other degrees in the art world. And without it, all kinds of doors are locked to you. What should be the model is an example of, so I do have a master's degree, but my friend that I met in Spain last year just sent me an email because of the conversation that we had last year. He's the dean of the MFA program in Boise, Idaho, and he basically, we had a long conversation about this in Spain, and I said, you know, I don't have the money to get a master's in fine arts. Like, I'm not trying to go in debt again. What can you do to help me? He went back to his college and advocated for a graduate assistantship program. So now they have funding to provide an MFA for free for students of color. That's the thinking model, right? It wraps it back around. And in order to be able to think that way, you have to be talking to people who haven't had that opportunity and understand what that actually means. So the challenge that I had with Evergreen is that same exact challenge that you're talking about. You cannot see what you cannot see. You don't know what you don't know. And because we are raised in a racist country, everything is racist. And it's my belief that everybody is racist. We're just on a spectrum. Some people are way more racist than other people, right? And some people are just trying to hide it better, okay? With that said, because we're raised and we're seeped in racism, and we're seeped in this illusion of racism, it's very hard to see what you don't see and hire teachers of color. Because what I get is this thing around, oh, well, we can't find teachers of color, or we can't find theater artists that are of color. You get that a lot in Seattle, right? You see these plays, like there was this one play where my friend was an actress in this play, or she had tried out for it. She was going to be. And then she came home, and she's Indian. She's like, I got the job. And I said, well, why are you so bummed out? And she said, because, I feel like they're trying to typecast me. The play is about the first African-American astronaut, yet they're using me because I'm the only person of color that tried out. And then she said, I told them this, and they said, well, we can't find people of color. We can't find black people, right? And so that is always the excuse. And until we actually look at this school to art pipeline as a means for uplifting and including everyone at the table, we're going to continue to get. This is the result. Not having teachers, not having curriculum that is designed with artists of color in them, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, Onyx Fine Art is a group that started 15 years ago, and it's all Black people. It is a Black arts organization that supports visual artists. And so if Evergreen needs some books on artists of color, you let me know and I'll hook it up. Mm-hmm.